Scott recruited me to help him develop a book that he's putting together on evaluation monitoring and evaluation training. It's really an excellent text if you're interested. Scott has worked for many years in international development with experience in over 40 countries and lots of connections out there. He was with the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Society in Geneva for a number of years. Then he worked with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation in London. And now he's working as an independent consultant on the coast of Spain near Barcelona. And so thanks very much. I apologize again, Scott, but over to you.
No worries, no worries. Great. So as I was saying, I found it useful sometimes to frame a little bit about how one gets to what they focus on in evaluation. And the cliff notes or the teaser is that I got into evaluation not through studying it as a student. I got my graduate degree at UCLA in geography in the mid-90s, looking at sustainable development, or maybe sustainable underdevelopment. But I got involved in evaluation in the early 2000s. I also had a strong background, though, in adult education, actually in outdoor education with the National Outdoor Leadership School and the Outward Bound School. So I found my interests with adult learning and evaluation merging because I was hired initially with the International Red Cross Red Crescent as an M&E officer, monitoring and evaluation officer. And one of the things that I learned very quickly is for successful monitoring and evaluation, it wasn't so much me doing it as an officer, but building the capacities of others to either do it, support it, or use it. And that has been a continual thread in my career in evaluation, working with different organizations. That's one point I wanted to get across. And it's only recently that I've been freelance consulting. As Brad introduced, my most recent role was Director of Evaluation with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which is based in London. And now I'm working, I have a variety of different assignments, helping build up a suite of guidance notes for evaluation capacity development with the Adaptation Fund, which is part of the World Bank Group based in DC. And I'm starting an assignment with the Climate Investment Fund, also based in DC. But a recent one that I did that was very interesting was an organizational capacity assessment of the M&E system for the International Trade Center, which is based in Geneva and back-funded by the WTO and the United Nations. So all of that just kind of comes in, and as you can maybe hear, a lot of my background has been gravitating towards helping organizations look at their evaluation and function, and then how to build up or develop capacities for them to best support that. All right, so my presentation, I should just say, the title of my presentation is the top 10 tips. It was, I don't know if people are familiar with David Letterman. He used to do a countdown during his late night show. This is not going to be quite going from the least funniest or least important to the most funniest or most important, and I'll explain why shortly. But what I tried to do is distill top 10 key lessons. And I gave this presentation the year that Brad and I came out with the book. I think it was 2016 at the AEA conference. And it was standing room only. It was really quite interesting to see the interest in this. I've revised things a bit, and without further ado, let's get going. So first of all, as I mentioned, I make a distinction between or people make a distinction between ECB and ECD. The one distinction you might want to be aware of is a lot of the people, or some people in evaluation capacity development, sometimes narrowly focus evaluation capacity building on just more training and individual learning, whereas development is sometimes used for capacity building interventions with international organizations. A lot of it's just semantics. So I'm fine with them being used interchangeably. And if I do that, realize that they mean both the same thing. I do adopt a broader perspective to evaluation capacity building or development. It's much more than just training, as this presentation will underscore. And it also refers not just to activities related to evaluation, but also it crosses over into information and knowledge generation, management, and use throughout the life cycle of the interventions that organizations implement, whether those interventions are programs, projects, but also strategies and policies as well. So let me just see if there's any more notes on this. As we know, evaluation also gets pulled into diagnostic work like baseline and endline surveys, monitoring, setting up monitoring systems. So all of that type of stuff is what I've found myself getting involved with, and what most of the organizations that I work with doing ECB are interested in. And so it's under all that umbrella. And I'm not going to read my slides for you, but if any of you are real ECB heads, meaning that you've researched a lot on this, you might recognize that quote from 2022. All right, so without further ado, I think many people here are familiar with Michael Quinn-Patton's trilogy of key evaluation approaches: utilization-focused evaluation, developmental evaluation, and principles-focused evaluation. There are a lot of different ways to cut a pie and serve it, and what I'm going to be presenting to you is clearly based on through my lens and my perspective of evaluation capacity development. But one of the things that I do find is it's very principles focused. So a lot of the tips here can actually be principles. And the reason I mentioned Michael Quinn-Patton is because I think of that trilogy. I think the principles focused evaluation sometimes gets the least amount of attention, but I think it's a really valuable contribution, and not just him, but others have made in the field of evaluation. One of the things about principles that I like is it doesn't dictate or straitjacket where you're going with predetermined results or goals, but instead it highlights the guiding principles or practices that allow you to get there, the priorities. And that's what I'll be sharing with you. And obviously where we want to get to is evaluation capacity building or development that makes a difference. So the first principle, and this is why I don't lead up to the most important, but I think I start with the most important, is to adopt a systemic or systems approach to organizational ECB. Successful ECB needs to be considered in the larger context in which it occurs. Individual people are complex. And if you're a parent like I am, you know that. Organizations are very complex. Their contexts are complex. The problems and goals that they often approach, like in the area that I work, international development, is very complex. And if you were to take, for example, any one of the 17 sustainable development goals, you would see that those areas that they can be working on are complex. One of the things that I like to bring up when talking about this, and if you ever find yourself maybe doing an organizational capacity assessment, for evaluation or whatever, is to ask for an organogram right off at the beginning of the organization. A very important thing. And then situating around that organogram some of the key stakeholders or actors in this system that organization operates. I'll be spending the most time looking at this principle or this tip because really all the rest of the principles or tips that I'll be talking about fall underneath this one. So ECB does not occur in isolation. It's context dependent. Organizations are embedded in the system with a unique configuration of different factors and actors to consider. For example, right now I'm working with organizations based in Washington, D.C. and caught up in a very big World Bank Group bureaucracy, which was very different when I was working with a private foundation in London who didn't have to do any fundraising because they had a ton of money themselves. Those are just two examples. And if you're working with an organization like an educational district, I used to work evaluating LA Unified School District in Los Angeles. That was a very different system, or a hospital, or what have you. One of the things I think is important for a systems perspective is understanding the interrelated and dynamic factors, as I said, that not only can support ECB, but hinder it. And it's kind of like being a detective and determining how to best navigate existing, but also emergent factors and actors for successful evaluation capacity building. And some of that can involve at times scenario playing and thinking that out loud when you're working with people in an organization, or if you're in that organization and you're considering what's the best pathway for evaluation capacity development. This conceptual framework, which we have in our book, is not original to us. I've got on here about 5 different sources that I've seen different versions of this. And the reason I like it is, and the reason I think it's had so much uptake is because it's pretty intuitive. The supply can be the stock of human capital and presence of eminent technical skills. The demand, the incentives or motivations to use the skilled personnel to good effect. And what this is really showing, it's a levels analysis. At the micro level, you have the individuals or project teams, and then at the meso level, you have the organization, and with that, there's an organizational culture referring to the unique personality, which will vary according from organization, its mission, leadership tone, management style. Is it a civic society organization, a public agency, or is it a private organization? And one of the things to think about at that organizational level is sometimes efforts to build capacity conflict with the organizational structure and practices. And some might find it threatening, or may resist it, or may make it difficult to adopt. And these are all important factors to think about when doing either a formal or informal assessment to inform any type of capacity building strategy or plan. At the macro level, that's the laws, the regulations, the funding, the socioeconomic and political trends. For example, if you're working in just about anything that was good, sorry for the politics, in the United States during the Trump era, that would have a huge impact. If you're an organization working on migration or the environment pre-Trump and then Trump got elected, that can have a huge impact on your organization and your ability to do capacity development or what type of capacity development you might want. Another example at the macro level that I think everyone can resonate with is COVID, and how that changed things. Over here in Europe, in the recent year, the war in Russia, in the Ukraine with Putin's warpath. So these things are all factors or examples at the macro level that are to think about for EC, evaluation capacity development. And so as you can see here, I've got a couple things on this slide. One is a resource that I like to share with people from CRECS-CEC and RISC 2004. It's still a valuable resource to draw upon. And then the diagram there is a conceptual diagram showing some of the major factors really at the at the macro level, the political, economic, regulatory, the demand and funding. And these things include also, for example, if you're working in the United States or in Canada, you've got a strong VOPI or the Canadian Evaluation Society and the American Evaluation Society, which has different the AEA principles for evaluation, standards, and good practice and such. Whereas if you're working internationally, a lot of times where I work, sometimes you might find yourself working with, when I was with the Red Cross, with a national society in a country in Africa or Southeast Asia, where there might not be that existing framework or capacity in the country to support the evaluation function in different organizations or the capacity development. These are things to take into consideration. The public infrastructures, the facilities, the transportation, and even access to internet can be very important to be thinking about when you're looking at evaluation capacity development. And whether it's a formal capacity assessment or more of an informal one, when you're doing a causal analysis, if you identify any perceived gaps in evaluation performance that capacity building could address, and when you start examining the underlying reasons for these gaps, you might discover that it's not necessarily because people or individuals or teams don't have the capacities. It could be for other reasons, and that's what this slide is about. So the first one is, yes, they might have inadequate skills or knowledge, but oftentimes it could be they have that and there's inadequate motivation or incentives. Or maybe there's inadequate expectations. Or maybe people have the skills, but there's inadequate feedback on how those skills are being applied, or inadequate labor supply. There could be issues where the problem is actually in the recruitment of people in the organization, not coming in with the capacities. And rather than building the capacities of people there, another thing that should be looked at as incorporating into job descriptions and recruitment competencies for new staff to bring into the organization. There can be inadequate physical resources. For example, in a lot of the data collection that is involved with, in let's say a malaria program in Africa, where you're using handheld phones or pads and stuff to enter in survey data and stuff. If those physical resources aren't there, that it might not so much be an issue of capacity in the sense of people not having the knowledge or skills, but rather the resources to apply that. And then one of the more important ones is there leadership and management to support people applying their capacity? And I'm going to get a little bit into this when I talk about transfer, which is another big tip. But anyhow, there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. It says, if I only had an hour to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 45 minutes sharpening my axe. And for me, as evaluators, we often forget an important part of evaluation is diagnostic evaluation. or ex-ante evaluation. And that's taking the time to really do a good context analysis, a systemic analysis of what are the evaluation capacity building needs before really jumping in and providing it. So I just wanted to really kind of underscore that. And this is actually the resource more than the earlier one that I really recommend. It's a 530-page World Bank publication. It's for free. It's getting dated. It's 2009. I think probably logic models were still being used more than theories of change, but it's got a lot of different resources on it. And so I just wanted to share that for that reason, this slide for that reason, but also this is from the cover of the slide, and not the slide, the book. And it shows an attempt of showing, I think, how looking at evaluation capacity development is a systemic puzzle in a way, where you have different pieces that come together. One of the metaphors that we use in our book when I'm explaining systems thinking and evaluation capacity development is the metaphor of a chef, and how a chef needs to think about supply and demand. They're the diners who sit at the table. They're the stakeholders. Are they carnivores? Are they vegetarians? Do they have any allergies? Then there are the dishes. That's the type of resources and stuff that you're going to be providing to build people's capacities. And are those dishes nutritious? Are they tasty ingredients? There's the market, or the availability and cost of the ingredients. Are there existing resources out there to help you with your capacity development? And we'll get to that in a second. And then there's the preparation, the cooking, and the facilities and the cooks. And then the venue, the setting, the restaurant, where the food, the table that the evaluation capacity development is going to be served on. So these are all part of that systemic view. And again, I'm still on just the first tip, so let me move on. All right, second tip: plan and deliver and follow up ECB with attention to transfer. ECB makes a difference when it's useful and used. In training, you often hear the term training transfer, and that's the ability of individuals and teams to apply what they learn. Oftentimes, we get people getting trained and they go back to the organization, but they don't have an opportunity to apply what they've been trained in. And that's where leadership support is often really critical. For ECB, which training is just one part of, transfers the abilities of those who participate in any ECB activity, whether individuals or teams, to apply what they've learned. This is a very critical one, and why I've listed it second. And I think an auxiliary of this, as I was just mentioning, is the leadership often sets that tone for the organization and the degree to which there can be uptake of any ECB that's been provided. I would not underestimate this. I know Haley Preskel has written a bit about this as well, or maybe not a bit, but a lot. And that's the multiplier effect that strong leadership can have on the degree to which investments in evaluation capacity building can have on an organization. And not just looking at who are the leaders and the champions for ECB, but also identifying those who might be the roadblocks or the gatekeepers. Maybe they're not for it or against it, but they're gatekeepers. And this is all being strategic when you're thinking about working either in an organization or with an organization to build its evaluation capacities. Our third tip is meaningful engagement of stakeholders. And I think just about every textbook on evaluation will identify stakeholder engagement as critical. And the same is true for ECB. Meaningful participation is especially important, though, if you're going to be building people's capacities. The more engaged and empowered the whole organization is throughout the whole ECB process, the more ownership and potential for developed capacity to stick and to be used afterwards. It's important to do power analysis because sometimes you can get, as I mentioned earlier, people who are roadblocks to ECB. Sometimes you get cliques or territorialism, or there might be hierarchies in an organization or marginalized groups based on gender, race, or other differences. And that all kind of falls into that, the importance of taking the time to do a good assessment up front. In this picture here, for example, in the Maldives during the tsunami, when we actually spoke with different people, we would often separate the women from the men because the woman would speak more freely because that's the culture that they come from when they were just women. And even the people asking the questions might not be a white male like me, but somebody who's more culturally appropriate to ask the right types of questions for building the capacity. Of this case, this was the it was one of the newer national societies, Red Crescent National Society, that was developed in the aftermath of the tsunami. So it needed to get their evaluation capacity built up. Again, that participation is related to building the mutual understanding and support of not just the people who are going to be receiving organizational capacity development, but also the people who will be supporting the uptake and use of evaluation capacity development. Now, I threw this in here. This is relatively new. It wasn't in the previous presentation. And this came, a lot of the work that I'm doing, I've been incorporating rubrics. And this is incomplete. You can see the ... for the descriptions. I found a lot of people are familiar with rubrics because it's common in education. And it basically, in fact, I can't see if you're raising your hand or not. Maybe I can. If you are or have used rubrics, you can raise your hand. Yeah, I'm seeing some hands come up. People in the evaluation field might know of Jane Davidson and others. And reason I wanted to share it with you is just I think it's a very interesting way to encourage participatory approach to evaluation capacity building or development, even at the start of like if you're doing a 2-day workshop or something that's rather short and not a drawn out strategy, to just ask people, help them first of all co-create the rubric with you. And this is showing one from initiate, stabilize, grow, amplified. Sometimes you can use one more on the biological stages of a human being, infancy, childhood, adolescence, adult, and elderly. And then you can define the definitions for each category and then help or lead a conversation in which the people participating in it start rating where they see their organization. And that in itself can be a very valuable exercise where it builds understanding, shared understanding, and ownership for whatever actions will be recommended for evaluation capacity development. All right, so the fourth one. Now, not systemically, this is systematically approach organizational ECB, but remain flexible and adaptive to changing needs. So like evaluation, ECB is intentional. It's in most of the conventional definitions of ECB, and it's conducted to meet specific needs. And it makes much more of a difference if you approach it systematically. Have some type of, it doesn't mean, I'm not recommending a rigid blueprint that's blindly followed. There could be a developmental approach even to it, which I would encourage, but having some type of plan or approach, and that's where principals can often be useful, because principles don't dictate exactly where you're going to go, but they describe how you want to go about getting there. And some of these, what I'm sharing with you today, these 10 tips actually could be principles. The plan should not inhibit experimentation and the ability to adapt and respond to emergent learning. Most of my ECB experience, we're always tweaking or adapting either the resources that are developed or the trainings. This presentation, adapting it before I actually present it. So it's really important to do that, particularly as there's going to be a lot of oftentimes changing needs or anticipated positive or negative outcomes in the process. Very important here. And then the other thing I just say is creating feedback loops to monitor and evaluate the actual evaluation capacity development process itself. And some examples of that can be a reference group, or an advisory group, or even just something as simple as a discussion board online, or an email channel where people feel that they can provide or reflect, and of course meetings as well. And when coming up with an idea of how to approach ECB, or what you're, for example, in my assignment with the adaptation fund, coming up with an idea for a whole platform and the number of different guidances that we're going to have and everything, having a validation workshop with key stakeholders to see if that resonates with them before we invest the resources further into actually developing them. An auxiliary for that is sometimes you need to make sure that what you're developing is realistic given the resources and capacities. I remember searching for a picture to convey this, and this is what I ended up landing on. The engine's just too big for the car to move. Proportionality acknowledges that organizations often face significant time constraints, resource constraints, and other things, like particularly during COVID-19, or quite frankly, in my area, I work a lot in climate change. The forecast for the frequency and magnitude of disruption is quite high, and that will be affecting organizations. So I think this tip is very important.
Scott, just speaking of time constraints, just wanted to make you aware that we're like 40 minutes in now, and we want to reserve a bit of time for discussion afterward.
How much time do we have altogether again?
Well, we got till the top of the hour is when most people have to depart. So just if you could be mindful of that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks. So our fifth tip is to align and pursue ECB with organizational objectives. And as you can see here, ECB doesn't exist for its own sake, but it's a means to an end. So thinking about the whole organization, this relates to that systems thinking tip. And so this is an example of a generic organizational elements to be thinking about for evaluation capacity development. This was an extra slide that I threw in, and I'll be really quick on it. We often have siloing in organizations, as pictured on the left. You have different teams working on towards their own objectives, and what we have on the right is a matrix diagram. And I wanted to share this because this is the essence of this has come up so much in my evaluation capacity development work. And I'm not going to read through it all, but that's just the gist of the slide. And I think you can read there, ECB depends on it being complementing the whole system. Number 6 is pretty straightforward, and that is ensure your strategy is realistic to the capacities. Don't build a little bit similar to what I was talking about before. If a skateboard will get you around the block, you might not need a Maserati to do so. And oftentimes ECB is cooked up in an office distant from the field or where people are actually using it. And it's important to really get stakeholder input, and considering practical things as well, as I mentioned before, how many resources, what type of resources the organization has, the time frame, human resources as well as financial resources, and also the coverage or outreach of the ECB effort. Is it just a team, or is it actually the whole organization? This is very important, and that is to capitalize on the different outlets and mediums for evaluation capacity development. And I found I usually don't need to talk a whole lot about this slide, because in today's day and age, people are familiar with the options online, either synchronous or asynchronous, for delivering things like we're doing right now, learning, knowledge sharing, and such. But there are quite a few, and as you can see from webinars and coaching and mentoring, and mind you, mentoring and coaching can also be online, not necessarily face-to-face. So these are valuable things to think about. And related to that is, don't reinvent the wheel if there is a good one to recycle. An important thing to think about when you're looking at what resources to support your evaluation capacity development is, to what degree do you need to adopt? Can you adopt something, or should you adapt a pre-existing resource, or do you need to develop it? This is just a quick, I don't know if you heard of the 70-20-10 model, but basically it's based on the idea, and you can see where it comes from at the bottom, from McCall et al., that 70% of learning comes from real life, actually on the job experience, doing things, 20% from relationships, networks, and feedback, and 10% from formal or non-formal type of education, such as training and other structured sources of learning. And I like to share this when we're thinking about how we provide evaluation capacity development, because there are valuable ways, again, looking over here with on-the-job training and coaching, mentoring, internships, and so forth. Number 8, design and deliver learning grounded on adult learning principles. This is something that, for what we did, we took a deep dive into this, at least for the book that Brad and I came out with, and we identified these 14 adult learning principles. And it's not just because our time's short. I was not intending on reading through all these adult learning principles with you, but I think you'll recognize some of them, like number 6, number 5, adults come in with a lot of experience. That's what differentiates them from children. So the more you can incorporate that past experience, the more you can contribute to number 7, number 6, making it relevant and meaningful. The adult learning principles, they're not absolutes, nor are they exhaustive, but I've found that they've held up and apply across contexts internationally that I've worked in. And then this is something that I think is just part and parcel of good evaluation, and that is to uphold the professional standards, principles, and ethics. And I think most people get this. As you know, I've put here, this is a little US centric, but I put here some of the resources from the United States, but there are other ones as well. And then below on the bottom part, those are ethics and standards, not so much just for evaluation, but just examples of standards in the profession or areas of adult education. And then lastly, practice and model what we evaluators preach, walking the talk. And that's when you're doing ECB and you're actually implementing it, Take the time to listen, reflect, learn, and adapt. Build in structured opportunities for feedback, which I mentioned before, feedback mechanisms and such. And as I said, they can be working groups, feedback forums or surveys, participatory debriefs. There's a lot of different ways of doing that. So there we are, the top 10. And lastly, you'll be getting a PDF of these slides. Lastly, don't sell anything on my website, and not even my services. It's mostly a resource website. And that link on the top right, there's over 200 handpicked open access resources for M&E capacity development. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. And that's it. The top 10.
Very good, Scott. Thanks so much. That was really very comprehensive, and I love the way you started out with quite a bit of time on that first principle, which is particularly important. Also wanted to mention that in the book, the last part of the book is full of, what do we have, like 98 practical activities or resources we can use when we're doing ECB. I forget, there's some large number
99,
of
99.
Yeah, 99. Okay, there you go.
And each one written in a way that they can be very much adapted according to different contexts.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's been a real success with the book. A lot of people like it for that. And they use,
Right.
I've been told by a lot of people, they use it not just for building capacity in M&E, but other areas as well.